It's always a good thing when writers are able to sort of subvert expectations and somehow still pay homage to the original material. And somehow the writers managed to do both with this very excellent finale of Presumed Innocent. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, go ahead, like, share, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, ring that bell below. Anytime we have something, you will be among the first to know. A little later than I wanted to be this week, especially for the finale, but travel wouldn't let me be great. And unfortunately, I got stuck in a city where I had none of my equipment and my setup stuff because I was planning to be back in time. But CrowdStrike, look it up if you if you haven't heard about it. The season finale of Presumed Innocent is here. It's called The Verdict, and I will sort of now let the cat out of the bag. I have read the book and watched the original film for that this series is sort of a recreation of, and I'm going to use that term going forward because it's not a one-to-one. Because of that, I sort of had my idea of where this was going and leading to who this entire time in the original, the wife, Barbara, was the person who actually was the killer. We play with that a little bit here, and before we get the true reveal of who the killer is. And so I love that they sort of give us that direction, play with that homage to the original story, and then create it and twist it, turn it on its head for the 2024 version. So we pick up at the end of the last episode where the fire poker was presented at Tommy's house with a note that says, "Go after yourself." It was placed there, which I sort of alluded to. I thought it led me to believe that one of the two children would be there. I was leaning more towards Kyle because it had sort of been placed that he was already present on the scene. And so forensics and all the police are there to sort of gather evidence about how this poker wound up in this place. And Tommy lets on that his side door is always open, so there's no breaking and entering, no sign of forced entry because he leaves the side door open for his cat. Sure. Rusty gets the call that the fire poker has been found, and so they all sort of reconvene in the judge's chambers. So the judge, Raymond, Rusty, Nico, and Tommy, and Maya's there as well, and they all meet to sort of discuss what to do with this new piece of evidence. And so this fire poker is here, but it has no DNA, nothing to show that this is the murder weapon. Everything has been wiped and rubbed clean. No one here is able to tell if this is a fire poker that came from Carolyn's set. Like, nobody can figure that out. Even though Tommy does a sort of wink, like, "Hey, you might know," to Rusty, to which Rusty says, "Go after yourself." But nobody knows what to do with this piece of evidence. I mean, there's a note that somebody was clearly effing with Tommy, but that doesn't really mean anything. So the judge sort of presents and says, "Hey, what do you guys want to do going forward?" Once again, the judge offers a mistrial, and she's offered this tons of times here. And as I mentioned in the previous video, neither side wants a mistrial. Tommy actively, beyond a shadow of a doubt, wants to defeat Rusty, do it by any means whatsoever. So he's not going to put forth a mistrial, and Rusty doesn't want it because he doesn't want to have the fact that, hey, there's a did he or did he not cloud hanging over his head because a court of a public opinion, judge and jury's never actually made a verdict. So he's sitting here with this mistrial over his head. He doesn't want that. He wants there to be, I'm going to prison or I'm not. And I know that I'm innocent, so let's use that. So mistrial, we already know the answer to that. That's going to get thrown out. So Nico says that the prosecution is willing to continue, but he would like the jury to be made aware that this fire poker has been found, and let them know that this may or may not be the fire weapon, but we did find one and how it was presented to us. Rusty says, "How about Caldwell?" which is throwing a name, that's Carolyn's ex-husband. What about Caldwell? To which Nico's like, "What are you talking about? Why is Caldwell even brought up right now?" And Rusty's like, "Well, you guys never questioned him. We never asked him about anything. I'm just saying you should check in with him." To that point, the Raymond and Maya excuse Rusty from the room and just, "Hey, let's take a moment. Let's take a breather. Let's talk about this a little bit." And Raymond is presenting, like, under no circumstances whatsoever should this poker be introduced. No matter how they do it, it should be introduced as saying, "Hey, we found this," or "This was planted here." we shouldn't bring this up because this just gives the jury a sign that this poker is now in orbit, that now it exists. And the way that it was placed just seems a little fishy. This feels like this was planted here to sort of create a, hey, look at me. It couldn't have been me because the evidence is here. It just seems like this makes it more pointing towards you than I think it was intended for. And it is not often that a prosecutor all of a sudden just wakes up one day and says, man, I was trying this case. It's really hard. And all of a sudden, oh, look at there, a murder weapon. Hey guys, I found a murder weapon. He's like, it doesn't work like that. This jury, if they get this evidence, if they are told about this, they're going to immediately think that you planted this to sort of get yourself off. It's not going to help us. So let's not mention this at all. Maya also brings up another point that if you were going with the whole Liam directive, or if we're putting Liam as an option, we can't present the murder weapon because he is in prison and he would not be able to put the poker at said residence of Tommy's if that is the case. So we need to do everything possible if you're going to go with that. And Rusty's like, oh, now you want to go with the Liam option. Just like, I'm just saying, if that is still an option that you're trying to go with, we should not put that on the table. He's like, okay, fine. Barbara and Raymond discuss the poker, and Barbara's trying to get some information. It's like, hey, real quick, why aren't we presenting the poker? Like, wouldn't that get you off? And it's like, he tells her, like, if we do, Raymond, and he's not wrong, Raymond thinks that if we present that, the jury's going to think that I planted it, sort of just to get myself off. She's like, okay, well, that's fine, but what if it leaked? What if the news of it leaked? That would be just as damning. And Rusty brings up the point that the only way that it's going to leak is if it leaks from Tommy's side. And as much as he wants to win this case, he wants to win it fair. He doesn't want a mistrial, as much as I don't want a mistrial. So he's not going to leak this out because he doesn't want that. It's in at this point that Rusty says, I recognize the poker. And it has a chip in it. So even though Tommy was being an a-hole about it, he's right. Rusty could identify the poker. He knew that poker was coming from that place. Now, whether or not he set fires or he actually ever used it was one thing. We sort of learn why he knew that poker in great detail later, but he actively doesn't bring it up here, which is kind of, as much of an a-hole as Rusty is, we learn later that he was doing his version of protection in this moment to not bring up how he fully knew that was the poker from Carolyn's place. But he didn't let them know that I didn't tell anybody that I was aware that was that poker from the same place, because that would immediately put this in evidence. We then get another medical examiner who basically whole defense is about food and food digestion and how that affects the body post-death. And what we get here is somebody to sort of create a new timeline to adjust sort of the timeline as to when Carolyn actually was murdered. What we get introduced here is that Carolyn ordered Chinese food at a certain time, around 8 o'clock, or it was delivered around right before 9. And to digest the type of food that she had, if she was murdered, it would still be in her stomach, and her stomach at the time of death was empty. And so that has to push the time back as to when she actually could have been. So if she's eating at 8:45 or 9, it's going to take her about 2 hours or 3 hours to clear all that out. So she's not going to technically have been murdered until around 12:01. And that's what she presents it as. A pretty masterful way to adjust the time frame and sort of put forth a new set of rules as to where Rusty is and is not at the time of death. We were always thinking that the death was immediately at 9. It now is shoved back, and so that opens up more reasonable doubt. Tommy counters with, hey, is it possible that she never ate? And the medical examiner is like, well, clearly there was a half-eaten rangoon there and some food had been eaten. It's like, well, is it possible that someone else could have been there and eaten the food and not Carolyn? It's like, sure, that's possible. He then starts questioning her character, which is it's a weird choice, because I feel like I know why he's doing it, because what she presented was very damning. Basically adjusting the time frame, and so if the time for Rusty to be the killer, the time frame had to be legit at 9. Like, it stuck, because that's when he ran over there in a heat of passion, saying, "All right, fine, come over," killed her then, and dips. If that is not the case, and that sort of throws Rusty a little bit out of the window. So he's doing now his job to sort of damn this medical examiner. He's saying like, "Well, hold on, aren't you an examiner specifically for the defense?" She's like, "Yes." Well, it would be factual then that the defenses only use you when your testimony benefits them. And she's like, "Well, hold on, I'm an honorable person. Don't put that on me on my jacket." I mean, he's essentially calling her a liar and a person who is not honorable for her oath and everything that she does in her profession. It's a dirty tactic, but I think it is the sole purpose is to literally discredit her a little bit to say that, hey, that window may not be that time, and maybe she's just making up stuff to sort of benefit and get paid. So Raymond and Rusty and Maya and Barbara reconvene and sort of say, okay, look, we presented this to the jury, the timeline changes a little bit. If they buy that, if they buy that the timeline has changed, we now have to give you a new alibi as to where you were at that time. It's clear that you were there at that 9 o'clock frame that they have, but you probably weren't there then. So let's create it like where were you? And do we have any way to sort of corroborate where you were? And Barbara chimes in, is like, hey, I can say, I can give him an alibi, I can give him the time. And Maya's like, yeah, no, that's not gonna work. You are biased. You're gonna come off trying to gain sympathy for a person that you yourself don't even know that well. And you guys don't know each other. So this isn't really doing us any favor, because if you get up there on stand and we put you on testimony, they're going to rip you to shreds. They're going to ask you, were you aware that your husband was in an affair? And you're like, yeah, I was. Cool. Were you aware that he was returned to an affair that you thought was over? Were you aware that he got this woman pregnant? Were you aware of this, this, and this? Were you aware, Rusty, that Mr. Bartender Clifton is in the picture? And she's like, well, hold on, wait, what? He's like, yeah, they were following you. And to which Maya comes up with this thing that's saying, hey, we needed to cross all of our T's and dot all of our I's in the event that we did have to put you on the stand. We needed to know what we were getting into. And so the option of putting Barbara on the stand is not possible. It's not going to happen. At that point, that Rusty says, I think we got the case. I think we should rest. And Raymond's like, I'm not disagreeing with you. That's not a bad idea. I think you're right. I think we should rest. Rusty then comes up with the idea that says, I should give closing arguments. Raymond's like, cool, I was agreeing with you on the first thing, not so much on that second. That's a terrible idea. And Rusty says that there's nobody better to fight for my life and review for my life than myself. And Raymond reminds him, like, you have no credibility with the jury. Like, none. I don't think this is a good idea. Maya's kind of like in the same boat. And it's at that point the Rush is like, look, I don't mind. I understand having doubt from the jury. I don't understand and I don't appreciate having doubt from my lawyers, but specifically, I don't appreciate having doubt from my best friend. Speaking about Raymond. So he goes off, and then we just sort of see a montage of him prepping for his big speech, prepping for his testimony, what he has to do. Lorraine and Raymond meet. Lorraine was like, you need to recuse yourself from this case. And Raymond's like, well, that ship has sailed. It's a little too late for that. Now, if I were to do that, the judge is going to deny me. She's given me ample opportunity to do so, and it's going to seem prejudiced if I do it all of a sudden now. But he does say, like, when this is over, as much as this has had an effect on my health, I think I'm going to retire and just call it a day. But then see Rusty in the garage prepping for his speech, and Jane comes to have a conversation with him. And it's at that point that Jane sort of shows how worried she is about this. And Rusty's like, I got this. Like, there's nobody better to do this and fight for me than me. And while it does seem like a bit outside of the box thinking of way to do it, this is the way to go. So then we sort of see a montage of everybody prepping and kind of getting ready to go on to court. And Rusty delivers his speech. And it's a pretty good speech. He hits home on the fact that he is a bad husband. He's a bad husband and a bad father. He is 100% those things. He's guilty of that. But he did not murder Carolyn. He speaks on how much he loved Carolyn. He wishes that he could still have her around. He misses her. he mentions both Dalton and Michael Caldwell as options, as people who were at the scene of the crime. One of them was, one of them wasn't. Don't have alibis, have motives, but they were never questioned. Nobody here was ever questioned. This prosecution has done their due diligence and just came at me with guns blazing and never actually looked at the field. I was their only option. Without any evidence, they came to me first without looking at anything else. He's like, I'm not saying that Michael or Dalton did it, but you have to wonder. Like, you have to think about it. Like, they have to be on the board, and they never were. He brings up Liam. He's like, Liam's the same way. Have to bring him on, put him on the board. He has to be an option. He then hits on that the prosecution doesn't have evidence. They don't have evidence. Uh, they did not do their due diligence of looking at any other options. The time frame now is completely thrown out of whack. It's not what they said it was. Why are we even here? Like, why are we here? He then says like a pretty G'd up line. He's like, I am not an honorable man. I'm not an honorable man to my husband. It's really emotional about how his kids and his wife are going to view him. It's like, I am not an honorable man. Ironically, I am hoping that you, the jury, are. And that is how he rests. He does a pretty good job of hitting home how human he is, how terrible of a human he is, and how terrible of a man he is, but how he is not a murderer. Tommy then gets up to just destroy all of that, which is what he's supposed to do. But he leans into the fact that Rusty said he loved Carolyn. He leans into that and says, hey, he loved her, but it was more than love. It was an obsession. Smith was obsessed. He sent 37 texts the night of her murder. For somebody who says they loved her within the 48 hours after her death, which are the most critical times to find anybody's information about who did what to whom in a murder, he withheld evidence. He didn't want evidence to come to me. He lied. He did everything possible to hamper the investigation within those first 48 hours. He lied, he concealed, he attacked witnesses, he attacked medical examiners. He just seemed to be unhinged for a great deal of time in regards to somebody that he loved. He alluded to her ex-husband, to Liam, hell, to even me as being a possible suspect or somebody that we should look into, which are all fine. But he put Michael, her son, in the line of fire, and that's just a disgusting thing to do, sort of. That's what he in a roundabout way, that's what he says. And then he said that he is begging you to look at me and how I have a vendetta against him and how I'm unhinged and all this, blah, blah, blah. He's asking you to look at me. Fine, look at me. I'm asking you to look at me too. But after you look at me, look at him. Because this man did all of these things and he said he loved her, did everything possible to make sure that we didn't actually solve this. He shows murder scene photos, all that good stuff. He does a really good job at a cross-examination and at closing arguments for himself. And so then we wait. We have to wait for the verdict, and that's what's happened. There's a bit of a flashback that occurs where Rusty is with Carolyn, and they talk about how much time is after a case is ended before a verdict is given from the jury. And to that point that Rusty says, hey, the longer they take, more in the favor of the defense it is. But it's just to show that waiting game that everybody sort of feels is kind of right there. And I think this episode does a really good job of showing you, getting the tension of what happens in a court case, like how you feel in that closing arguments, which you have to go through the sort of breathless moment that exists between once the case is done and before you get that verdict. Like, you really don't know what's happening. It's out of your hands. You've done all you can do. You've played your game. You've done your dance, and now you just wait. So this is what we got. There's a scene where Tommy is in his office, kind of just going over his head if putting the poker into play or not putting the poker into play was the right move. He says, like, hey, I don't know if that was the right move. I feel like we should have presented it because it gives him an out to say that we had this in our back pocket and we didn't use it. Nico's like, you're overthinking it. You ran a good case, blah, blah. Tommy then says something that is just nothing to do with the case, really, but he's like, I never saw what he saw. I never saw what Carolyn saw in Rusty, which is less of a lawyer and a prosecutor and more of a person who was like upset that he wasn't the person in love or that Carolyn reciprocated love to. At that point, then Nico kind of like, hold on, how much did you love her? Before you can answer that, Eugenia comes in and says that the verdict has been reached and we need to go. It's interesting because this is sort of the first time that anybody else besides Rusty has sort of addressed the fact that Tommy also was in love with her. And I don't think, while he actively has shown throughout this season how he does not like Rusty, or he's always been trying to one up Rusty, like, hey, why does Rusty get this when I am just as good as Rusty? I should be one on one. This is the first time that you sort of put that parallel also in reflection to Carolyn. Like, he loved Carolyn much in the way that Rusty loved Carolyn. And he's kind of just like, well, hold on. Rusty's married with another wife. He's good. He's settled. He's got a family. I'm single. Why aren't you attracted to me? I'm just as good as he is. So I think a lot of this case is him sort of fighting for the affection of somebody who never reciprocated in life, maybe trying to sort of get that from her in some way or another in death. Fortunately for him, yeah. So everybody shows them sort of doing their last minute, getting themselves ready. The judge is buttoning up her gown. Rusty's getting ready. Everybody's sort of making their way to sort of converge upon the courtroom one last time. The jury is ushered in, and they read the verdict. And he is found not guilty. He is stoic. Rusty is stoic, doesn't make a move, doesn't smile, doesn't frown, doesn't, just kind of stands there while some of the folks around give facial reactions. Raymond's happy. Maya's like relieved and happy. The kids are both happy. For a moment, Barbara's not really responsive. She sort of holds her head down, but then she sort of starts hugging the kids as well. It's a celebratory moment. And then they escort them out of the courthouse. All four of the savages get into the car. Rusty still hasn't shown any real emotion. And when they get home, the family, Jane mainly, is asking, like, is this over? Do they have any chance for a retrial? It's important. Let's hold that beat and keep that note on why she's asking that. But she's asking, hey, is there any chance that they can retrial? I was like, nope. There's not going to be a mistrial. There's not going to be a retrial. They're done. They're not going to do this again. And he's like, well, I need to go out here to there's people on her lawn, newscasters and whatnot on their lawns. I need to go out here on the lawn and say something to them, because if I don't, they're just going to be out here until I do. So let me go knock this out now. He goes out to the lawn and he says, without a doubt, I'm very pleased with the verdict. That said, justice is not completely served, as we still don't know or have any leads as to who the murderer of Carolyn is. And that saddens me. And I wish, then he starts laying it on Tom. It's like, wish they had done a better job, instead of holding a vendetta against me, done a better job of doing all the things they could to find out who truly was responsible. Ask all the questions, ask all the people. Instead, they have not. And until we do that, justice is not served. And they failed Carolyn. I'm going to bring this up now. We'll get to the ending. But at this point, Rusty is well aware of who the killer is. Well, he has an idea of who the killer is. He knows that they are not on the track of who it is at all. And so his outright crapping on Tommy is he's a wild man, because he is doing this with full fervor. That's how little he thinks of Tommy. Like, he's like, I'm putting Tommy down. This is all on Tommy. This is Tommy's fault, knowing that there is no way in hell that they're ever going to find out who the actual person that killed Carolyn is, because he's done a due diligence to make sure that does not happen. That is morally a very effed up thing to do, but it shows you how calculated Rusty is, especially when it comes to protecting his family. Tommy's in his office, kind of sulking, and Nico comes in and is like, look, Tommy, there's nothing to hold your head down about. You ran a magnificent case. You did everything by the book. We had very minimal circumstantial evidence going in, and we did the best that we could. Now, you need to move on. You need to move on from Rusty. Let that go, and you need to Move on to the next. And there's going to be there's tons of other heinous people in Chicago that are always willing to murder. You need to be prepped to move on for them. And he's sort of still sulking and thinking about it. It's important, though, that he does sort of come out of this because he's going to continuously live in this. And unfortunately for him, there is no out. Rusty knows that there's no out. So he could get stuck in this race of always being in this case. And it's just best for him to sort of woosah a little bit and let this go. Like Rusty, again, got the better of him. And not only in this case, but you lost Carolyn when she was alive and you lost her in death. Just accept it. But that's not where the show ends. You're not just going to get the verdict in the end. But cool, he's not guilty. We're never going to find out who actually did it. This is where the show takes a bit of a turn, but it seems like it's headed straight for the exact same way that the previous movie and previous book went. As I said at the top, Barbara is our person that I thought, if they follow the structure, was the person who killed Carolyn. And so did Rusty. Rusty thought that as well. So we get a sequence where Rusty sees some bags packed and he goes in to talk to Barbara, who's outside in the garage working out on a bike. And he gets up to her and says, like, hey, I see the bags packed. I guess we're going on that vacation that we've always wanted, now that we got some time. And Barbara's like, well, should you ever try to impulsively destroy our family again, I want to be prepped and I want to be ready to have an out. And Rusty starts laughing a little bit and kind of giggling. It's like, that's funny. He's basically saying, that's funny coming from you. And it's at this point where he's like, I knew. He's like, I knew from the very beginning, but then I didn't know for a bit, and then I knew again. It's at this point that he starts to sort of like break down to Barbara that I'm aware of you being the person that killed Carolyn. And I've known for a while, but I did everything humanly possible to protect you and shield you from as much of this as I possibly could. Since this is all my fault anyway, I'm doing what I can to insulate us. What didn't compute to me, though, is that you seemed so completely normal a day after murdering Carolyn. That just didn't compute to me. Like, it had no effect on you at all. Like, that was hard for me to sort of swallow. And then Jane came to me and sort of explained, hey, is it possible that you could have had a dissociative break from this and like you compartmentalize the actual murder versus this? But mind you, Barbara is like, what the are you talking about? Like she is thinking that Rusty has lost her mind. And in this moment, she's thinking that Rusty killed Carolyn and is now trying to sort of force this story on her. It's at this point that she's like, do you think I killed Carolyn? And it's at this point that Rusty's like, no, but I think the other person in your body did, similarly like how the other person in my body covered up for you and tied Carolyn up. And at that point, Barbara's like, wait, what the hell did you just say? You tied Barbara up? It's like, yeah, I did it to protect you, to cover up for your mess when you killed her. He went back that night. So the timeline was actually correct. From that 9 to whatnot, she was not dead. He went back that night and found her dead and immediately thought this was Barbara. She's the only person I can do this. I thought originally I was going to call the police. I couldn't call the police because it dawned on me that this was you. And if I call the police right now, the first person that they're going to come to and think about is you. So we have to clean this up and make this appear like none of us were present at this time. So I just didn't call 911 to protect the one person that it would have fallen on. And then she's like, well, you offered up Liam. I was like, yes, I offered up Liam because typically prisoners will take a less jail sentence no matter what. Like if they haven't said they did something, it's like, hey, if it takes time off my sentence, sure. It's like it was worth a shot. It was an option. It didn't work. So on and so forth. But once Jane came to me with the disassociation piece of it, I knew that's what was going on with you. And I was like, okay, she doesn't even realize she did this. So now I need to continue this story to sort of protect her. To that point, she's like, Rusty is sick. She's like, I think, because at this, she knows she didn't do this. She's like, and I'm kind of upset that you are trying to lay this on me. And she's like, you're sick and you're wrong. And I feel like you're trying to use me as a scapegoat for murdering Carolyn. It's at that point that Rusty says, well, after your thing with the bartender, I put a bug on your car. And I saw that you went to Tommy's house and put the poker back on on his kitchen table, probably to try to help me, but it would have harmed me more. That piece is important because when they were talking in the earlier part, when they brought up the poker and why wasn't it presented and why was so on and so forth, at that point Barbara clearly didn't. She has no thought of it. She didn't actually kill him. But at that point, Rusty was still protecting her. It's like, I don't want to present this poker to you because I don't know if this is going to trigger anything back to your brain where you're like, oh crap, I did this, and sort of just mess up the story that they have. So he is still playing the long game. Like, I can't tell you now in this moment that I know you did this, so we're still going to play this poker piece doesn't have it. Even though he does tell her, hey, I know that was the poker from the house. So he sort of gives a hint, but he's like, I don't want to trigger this back up. That's important. But as the story goes on, Jane overhears it all. And Jane comes in and like with the sweater that she wore that night. It's all bloodied up. And is like, yeah, so mom has no recollection of that because she didn't do it. And she didn't drive to Tommy's house to place the poker. I did, because I was there that night. I'm the one who did this. Jane says, I went there to confront her, just to tell her to stand down, stop being around my father, stop effing my father, leave my family alone. It's at that point that Carolyn was like, I want you. It's not me. Your father doesn't want to let me go. Jane says, you need to quit your job and leave my father. And it's like, I can leave your father alone. However, we are a bit intertwined at this point because I'm pregnant with his child. And when she hears that, she grabs that fire poker and cracks that woman upside the head a few good times. And then just leaves. And so when she mentioned earlier in this show about a disassociative break, it wasn't so much to see if Rusty had it. She was doing it more to say, like, is that possible that I had that? And so she, in the immediate aftermath, goes home, doesn't quite remember it, thinks it was a dream. And then the next day when she realizes it was true, when they go off to breakfast, she says she doesn't feel good. And that's when she sort of traces her steps and cleans everything up. She cleans up the blood on the car. She takes the poker and buries it, gets rid of her sweater, all that stuff. While Rusty had cleaned up the scene with Carolyn and sort of created the homage of that it could be a copycat killer of Liam, and tied her up and all that good stuff. And so, yeah, Jane's our murderer, which somebody on the last video in the comments spoke of. I wasn't sure. I thought it was Kyle, but they said it was Jane. And my brain was also leaning me towards, if they're doing a one-to-one story, it's the mom. So I love that they pointed towards Barbara and then kind of did a quick divert and say, no, it wasn't her. It was Jane. What's great here, though, is that Rusty immediately fires off into, it's like, okay, cool. I was protecting mom. It wasn't Mama Bear. I'm going to protect my daughter. It's like, cool. From this moment, we never speak of this again. And it's in this that you can see that his love for Carolyn was quite strong, but his love for his wife, and stronger than that, his love for his daughter, trumps all of that. And he's like, yeah, I'm sad that Carolyn is dead. I would love to have spent the rest of my life with her, but that's not an option. Because it's not an option, I need to protect the care of the people that are here with me in my ride or dies. Rusty then comes in and sort of legalese this in case it ever does come out. But he basically says, you did this out of self-defense. You did this out of self-defense of the family, a family that I was starting to tear apart. And you felt she was the one, the antagonist, who was going to do so. This was all put into motion by me. So you put that strain, that the reason why this all took place, put that on me. We will survive. We will survive this as a family. We will go on as a family. But we will never mention this again. Okay? And then he hugs her. You can sort of see Barbara's a little shell-shocked by the whole moment. She's off at the corner, kind of like, what is happening? We love each other. And he hugs her, and it says that we are a family that loves each other. And then we sort of give it a montage of the aftermath of all of this. We see Lorraine and Raymond living happily in bliss of retirement. And Tommy has sort of moved on. He's enjoying a good football game, living the solo life, drinking a beer, having a good time. It looks like he has moved out of the home that he was in, or it's in at least a different location. But he seems to be doing better for himself, and has sort of let the Carolyn and the Rusty go, which is good for him. Because unfortunately, because of the situation, he was never going to get out of it if he didn't do so on his own accord. And then we see a family dinner of the Savages, kind of doing their family life again. And then you see a moment where Barbara sort of stares at Rusty and sort of love, awe, probably a little bit of contempt too, because he is responsible for why their daughter did the thing that she did, but also in all that he was so willing to throw his entire life away to protect both of them. First, her. He thought 100% that it was Barbara who killed Carolyn. It's like, cool. Even though I love Carolyn, my wife comes first, and I'm going to protect her. And I'll throw myself on the sword for it. And then when that doesn't happen, throws himself on the sword for Jane, and in a way rekindles or restructures their love for each other. Like Barbara, for the first time, probably sees him in a different light than she did before. It's like, hey, whatever mess we got into before, we were stronger for it. The other side of this just had to kill a life too, technically, because she was pregnant. But our family bond is tighter than it ever was before. And their relationship is, oddly enough, the better for it. I can imagine, even though we don't know for sure, you can imagine that she's probably not in therapy anymore. Perhaps some of it because she doesn't want to accidentally spill anything, but I think she's good. Um, as long as her family base and they've got each other, they are good. And that's how the show ends. They're just having a good old family dinner. And that is the season, not the series, because we are going to do another one of these, presuming it's getting a season 2, probably an anthology as this is all wrapped up. Don't know if we get any of these characters back again. Maybe you do. Different case with like Rusty and Tommy, who knows? But this was a really good show, and I love that they took what was there on paper and books and in film form before did it, got to the kind of the finish line, and instead of still like we're going to do the exact same ending, play with a little bit and subverted my expectations and made it a much better show for me, because I was sitting there like, oh, they're going to go say it's Barbara, and then for a moment I thought maybe Rusty was having a psychotic break and saying, hey, I did this, I was responsible for this, and I'm going to put this on Barbara so that we are kind of tied at the hip. But no, it was a little baby girl who did this, and that made it a better ending for me. Felt like if you were going to change from what was originally on paper, this was the best sort of way to go, and I truly appreciate it. I had a fun ride with this, and about halfway through, I could tell that this Barbara didn't have the same information to be as cold blooded as the Barbaras that were previous, and so I had sort of taken Barbara off the board about halfway through, and then this episode sort of pointed back to her, like the books and the movie did, confused the hell out of me, and then I was like, oh, that's a smart way to do that. So kudos to the writers, brilliant cast, everybody did their job amazingly. I will say that it might just be the delivery. Sometimes Nico, the way that he delivered lines just bothered me. But all in all, the cast as a whole was top notch. Rusty, Barbara, both of them are great. Jake and Ruth killed it. But I would say the honorable mentions specifically is Skarsgård as Tommy. Like he's great, because you want to hate him. You're supposed to hate him because we're using Rusty as our antagonist, but he's sort of the puppy dog that just wanted to be loved on by Carolyn, and when it wasn't, he kind of took this as his mission to do so, and wound up sort of engulfed in this world where he had no win. He couldn't win regardless. He had circumstantial evidence, but he also was going against a case where this wasn't the actual, like he's fighting a case where Rusty wasn't the actual killer, but because he doesn't have all the information, he would have wound up in a no win situation. I think it's important too to note that, yeah, Rusty was delaying the first 48 hours of this, not for himself, but he was delaying it to sort of give a little bit of a breathing room for what he thought was Barbara. Turns out it was for Jane, so the person changes, but the idea was the same. And so, as much love as he had for Carolyn, it clear that his love for his wife was significantly stronger. What did you guys think about this season finale of Presumed Innocent? Go ahead and leave your thoughts and comments in the comments below. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have a podcast with the same name. That's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that plays podcasts, we're there. And like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.